Hey everyone, welcome to Life Reflections. Today I'm sharing a life story that might just hit home for you. If you enjoy it, give it a thumbs up, drop a comment with your thoughts, and hit that subscribe button to join me for more moments that matter. Let's dive in.
It was supposed to be a simple vacation for my husband and his family, an escape to paradise. But when Nathan casually informed me that he was going on a trip to Hawaii without me, something inside me snapped. I had been the one who cared for his disabled sister for years. I had been the one who put up with his family's cold stares, judgment, and constant criticisms. And now, I was being told I wasn't even invited to the trip that had once been a dream we shared. "It's just a family trip," Nathan explained. "We need you to stay behind and take care of Ivy." The words stung. It was as if everything I had sacrificed for him, for his family, for our marriage, had been reduced to nothing. I stood there, my heart racing. At that moment, I realized how far I had been pushed aside. How little I mattered. It wasn't just the exclusion that hurt, it was the realization that I had been taken for granted for so long. Nathan's actions left me reeling, and I began questioning everything I thought I knew about my marriage and his family. Why was I always the one who had to stay behind, pick up the pieces, and make excuses for their behavior? Was I just the person they kept around for convenience? But little did I know, my world was about to be turned upside down by someone I least expected, Ivy, Nathan's silent, seemingly helpless sister. I had spent years taking care of her, thinking she couldn't walk, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything for herself. But that day, Ivy revealed something that would shatter everything I thought I knew about her, and about myself. The truth about Ivy was not only a revelation of her strength, it was a revelation of the truth about the family I had married into, and the dark secrets they had kept hidden for years. Secrets that would change everything for me. Ivy wasn't the fragile, helpless person everyone had led me to believe. She was smart, perceptive, and far stronger than anyone ever gave her credit for. What she revealed to me that day, after Nathan and his family abandoned me once again, was something I'll never forget. Ivy had been pretending all these years. Pretending to be silent. Pretending to be weak. All to escape the suffocating control of a mother who had never seen her as anything but a burden. It was in that moment, as Ivy spoke words I never thought I would hear from her, that I realized my entire life was about to change. The real story wasn't just about the betrayal I had endured from my husband, it was about the incredible, untold truth about Ivy. A truth that would turn me into someone I never thought I'd become, a woman who would fight for herself, who would demand respect, and who would no longer let herself be pushed aside. From the moment Nathan dropped the bombshell, I could feel something inside me start to unravel. "We're going to Hawaii," he said, his eyes avoiding mine, "just me and my family. They decided it's a family trip, so you'll stay here and look after Ivy." His words were so casual, so final, as though he'd just told me they were having pizza for dinner. But what really stung was the way he said it, like it was just another ordinary detail in the rhythm of our daily lives. Nothing about it screamed, "This is important." Nothing about it showed any awareness of the hurt I felt. It wasn't just the fact that I was being left out. It wasn't just about the warm beaches and the carefree vacation that was now forever tied to their family memories, and not mine. What truly got to me was the way Nathan acted, like it was no big deal. Like I should be grateful to stay behind, taking care of Ivy, his sister, who, despite her silence, had become the unspoken third party in our marriage. Ivy had always been a part of the equation, but suddenly, I found myself alone in a marriage that had become a hollow shell of what it once was. The emotional distance between Nathan and me was growing every day, but this was the final straw. I had been holding everything together, the dinner, the chores, the constant sacrifices. It felt like no one really noticed. No one asked if I was okay. No one even seemed to care. The woman who had always been there to lend a hand, to smile through the pain, was now the one left behind. Alone. Again. I could sense a shift in Nathan. In the beginning, we were partners, but somewhere along the way, it seemed like he stopped seeing me. He stopped texting me good morning, stopped asking if I had lunch, stopped being affectionate in the little ways that used to make me feel valued. And now, here he was, telling me that I wouldn't even be a part of this family vacation. Just like that. His emotional distance felt suffocating. His eyes, once warm and full of understanding, had become cold and dismissive. He had always been the type to shrug things off, to avoid confrontation with his mother, and now, I saw that same behavior trickling into our relationship. He didn't argue when his mother scolded me. He didn't defend me when she made her biting remarks. But the deeper pain came from his silence. His refusal to engage. His decision to let me take the backseat in our own marriage. In the moments when Nathan wasn't home, I found myself sinking deeper into the loneliness that had started to surround me. I sat in the empty house, staring at the quiet spaces, wondering where things had gone wrong. What happened to the man I had married? The one who used to text me randomly to say he loved me? The one who once whispered sweet things to me in the quiet hours of the night? And then, there was Ivy. She was quiet, but in a way that felt different. She was the sister-in-law that everyone thought of as fragile and silent, but I was beginning to see a different side of her. A side that I never knew existed. Ivy, who had suffered nerve damage when she was younger, was someone who had always been in the background. Everyone treated her like a child, like someone who needed constant attention and care. But I saw something more, something that no one else seemed to notice. There was a sharpness in her eyes. A brightness in her smile. An intelligence that went unnoticed by most. I started visiting Ivy more often. She lived with Nathan's parents, but something about her presence soothed me. Ivy wasn't like the rest of Nathan's family. She didn't have the same sharp edge as his mother, Linda. She didn't have the same emotional distance as Nathan. Ivy communicated in subtle ways, through her drawings, her gentle gestures, and her eyes. She didn't need words to express what she was feeling, and somehow, I began to feel like she understood me in a way that no one else did. Every time I went over to visit, I'd bring her little treats or something I knew she liked. And each time, she would smile, that familiar, secretive smile, like she was grateful for my company. I began learning sign language, not because she asked me to, but because I wanted to. I wanted to understand her better. I wanted to bridge the gap that had always existed between us. It wasn't just about helping her anymore, it was about finding someone who understood the weight I was carrying. Someone who wasn't judging me, who wasn't asking me to be something I wasn't. Our connection grew in subtle ways. I'd walk into the room, and Ivy would immediately light up, her eyes sparkling as if she was waiting for me. We'd sit together, her fingers gently tracing out the words on a letterboard, or she would draw something on her sketchpad, a house, a dog, a kite flying in the sky. And as she created her art, I began to see more than just her silence. I began to see her strength. But as much as Ivy and I were growing closer, something inside me was unraveling. The emotional distance between Nathan and me was becoming undeniable. It was more than just the silence between us, it was the growing absence of connection, the feeling of being completely invisible. He didn't notice when I needed him, didn't reach out when I was struggling, and seemed to take my efforts for granted. When I confronted him about the Hawaii trip, I had no idea what his response would be. I had no idea that it would be the final piece of the puzzle that would shift everything. In that moment, as I watched his expression become cold and dismissive, I knew that I wasn't just being excluded from a vacation, I was being erased from his life. It was the emotional betrayal that hurt the most. Not the vacation itself. Not even the exclusion. It was the realization that Nathan had stopped seeing me, stopped caring. It was the crushing weight of abandonment, the feeling that my presence no longer mattered to him. I had been the one to take care of everything, the house, his sister, the emotional weight of this marriage. And yet, when it came time for him to show me love, respect, or even care, I was left standing in the empty silence of my own life. But in that silence, Ivy spoke to me in ways no one else could. She became my anchor in a world that felt like it was slipping through my fingers. As Nathan continued to drift further away, Ivy and I began to grow closer, and the bond between us became something powerful, something neither of us had expected. I knew something had to change, but I had no idea just how much Ivy would change the course of everything. And when she spoke the words that I will never forget, I realized that I wasn't the one left behind, I was being set free. As the days went by, I found myself sinking deeper into the isolation that had taken root in my life. Nathan had grown colder, more distant, and I felt like I was slowly being erased from our shared life. The affection he once showed me, the sweet gestures, the tender conversations, all seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving behind only the hollow shell of a marriage. He came home late, his eyes glazed over with exhaustion from work, but I knew better. It wasn't just work that was keeping him away, it was everything else. It was the emotional distance, the unspoken rift that seemed to grow wider each day. At first, I tried to ignore it. I convinced myself that he was just going through a rough patch, that we would come out of it, and everything would return to normal. But as the weeks turned into months, I could no longer deny the truth. Nathan wasn't just distracted, he was pulling away. Every time I tried to bridge the gap, he avoided it. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped noticing when I was upset. And I was left standing in the emotional void, unsure of how to fix something that seemed beyond repair. The emotional weight of it all was unbearable. I couldn't turn to Nathan. He was gone, emotionally, even when he was physically present. But then, there was Ivy. His sister, the one who had been labeled helpless, the one everyone thought couldn't walk, couldn't talk, couldn't do anything. Ivy, the girl I had spent years caring for, always assuming she was a fragile soul who needed constant attention and care. But something inside me knew there was more to her than met the eye. I started visiting Ivy more often. There was something in her presence that calmed me, something that made the pain in my chest feel a little lighter. Every time I came over, she would sit by the window, waiting for me, that small, knowing smile on her face as she greeted me. It was a smile that spoke volumes, volumes I didn't understand at first. It was as if she knew things that I didn't, things about our family, about Nathan, things that I was only just beginning to scratch the surface of. But there was no way for me to know for sure, not until I started truly seeing her. I remember the first time I brought a sketchpad and colored pencils for her, hoping to spark some kind of connection. I had always communicated with Ivy in the simplest ways, through gestures, smiles, and the few signs I had picked up from my brief attempts at learning sign language. But that day, something shifted. She took the pencil from my hand, and instead of drawing a cat or a house like she normally did, she drew a door with a key. I remember looking at her, confused. What was she trying to tell me? Her eyes met mine, and she signed slowly, carefully, "You're not alone." The words hit me harder than I could have anticipated. Ivy, the silent one, the one everyone believed couldn't speak, had just spoken to me. Not with words, but with her hands. And in that moment, I realized there was so much more to her than anyone had ever realized. I was hooked. I had to know more. I started spending more time with Ivy, learning sign language in the evenings, when Nathan was working late or distracted by his never-ending pile of paperwork. At first, it was slow. I learned the basics, hello, thank you, good morning, but slowly, I became more adept. Each day I learned a little more, and Ivy would patiently teach me, her gentle movements and subtle expressions guiding me along the way. With every conversation, I felt like I was unlocking a new part of her. She wasn't just sitting there, silently waiting for someone to speak for her. She was watching, she was listening, she was understanding everything around her, every word that had been spoken in her presence. And as I grew closer to Ivy, something even more profound began to surface, something I never could have imagined. One evening, as we sat together in the dimly lit living room of Nathan's parents' house, Ivy signed something that left me breathless. "I'm not what they think I am." My heart stopped for a moment. What did she mean? What was she trying to say? I looked at her, unsure of how to respond. But Ivy was calm, confident even, as she signed again, "My disability is a lie. It's been a facade." The words hit me like a freight train. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind raced, replaying everything I knew about Ivy, about her condition, about her silence. She had been pretending all this time? Pretending to be helpless? Why? Ivy looked at me, her eyes steady and full of truth, and then she spoke in the softest of whispers. I had to. They made me do it. The pieces started to fall into place, and the weight of it all crashed down on me. Ivy wasn't the broken, fragile woman everyone had made her out to be. She was strong, intelligent, and far more perceptive than anyone had ever given her credit for. And the real reason she had been silent all these years was far darker than I could have imagined. It wasn't because she couldn't speak. It was because she had been silenced, forced into this role by her stepmother, Linda. Linda had created this narrative that Ivy was a helpless, broken soul, a girl who couldn't walk, couldn't talk, and couldn't live a normal life. It was easier for Linda to control her that way. Easier to keep her under her thumb, to make her a burden, someone who needed constant care and attention, someone who couldn't escape. But Ivy had escaped. She had found a way to make them believe the lie. She had played the part, staying silent and still, knowing that the more she conformed to their expectations, the less attention they paid to her. And the less attention they paid, the more freedom she had. Ivy's story, her strength, her resilience, it all hit me like a revelation. I had spent so many years feeling like the outsider, like the one who was never good enough for Nathan's family, always at the mercy of their judgments and expectations. But Ivy had been living a lie, too. She had been trapped in a world of control and manipulation, playing the part of the helpless one in order to survive. And as I sat there, processing everything Ivy had just revealed to me, I realized that I wasn't the only one who had been living in a fantasy. I had believed in my marriage. I had believed in the idea of family. But the truth was, my marriage was falling apart, and I had been blind to it for so long. The more I learned about Ivy's hidden strength, the more I began to see the cracks in my own life. Nathan's emotional distance wasn't just a phase. It was a pattern. It was a reflection of the way his family operated, a family that thrived on control, manipulation, and secrets. And now, Ivy was showing me that there was more to her than I had ever realized, more than I had ever been allowed to see. Ivy wasn't just the sister-in-law I had been helping for years. She was the key to unlocking the truth about my marriage. And as I learned more about her, I realized that my own path to freedom had just begun. Ivy had always been the silent one. The one who never spoke, who always kept to herself. She was the one everyone, including me, believed was incapable of much. Over the years, I had grown used to her silence, to the way she sat quietly by the window, watching the world pass by, her eyes always filled with something more, something I couldn't quite understand. I had learned to communicate with her in the only way I knew how, through simple gestures, signs, and sometimes even written notes. But there was always something about her that didn't quite add up. In the weeks leading up to Nathan's trip, Ivy and I had grown closer. I had learned enough sign language to understand her better, and in return, she shared things with me, small things, like the way she liked her coffee or the kinds of books she loved to read. It felt like we were finally building a bridge between us, one that had always been there but had never been explored. I began to see her differently, not just as Nathan's quiet, helpless sister, but as a woman with a mind of her own, someone who was more than the label her family had placed on her. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that day. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind of day where everything felt still, like the world was holding its breath. I had just brought over some homemade cookies for Ivy, something I knew she loved, and I found her sitting in the living room, staring out the window as usual. But this time, something was different. There was an intensity in her gaze, a spark I had never seen before. "Hey, Ivy," I said softly, walking over to her and offering her the cookies. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable, but there was a glint in her eye, a look that made my heart skip a beat. She didn't reach for the cookies right away. Instead, she signed something that caught me completely off guard. "It's time you knew the truth." I froze. The words felt heavy, like they were carrying the weight of 1,000 secrets. What was she talking about? What truth? My mind raced, and I felt a lump form in my throat as Ivy slowly pushed herself to her feet, her movements deliberate and calm. I watched in disbelief as she stood, not shaking, not struggling to find balance. Ivy was walking. She was standing. And she was walking toward me. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Ivy? My voice was shaky, barely a whisper. Was this a dream? Had I misread everything? Ivy turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw her as she truly was, strong, confident, and resolute. I've been walking for years, she said, her voice soft but steady. I could barely process what she was saying. She continued, and I've been talking for just as long. I couldn't believe my ears. All these years, I had thought she was completely incapable. All this time, I had believed the lie that had been fed to me by Nathan, by his mother. But here she was, standing in front of me, no longer the fragile, broken girl I had once cared for. Ivy was no longer pretending to be helpless. The silence between us stretched on for a moment, my mind struggling to catch up with the words Ivy had just spoken. It wasn't just that she could talk and walk. It was everything else, the reason behind the facade she had created for herself. She didn't need to say it, but I could see it in her eyes. There was a pain there, a deep, hidden wound that had been masked by years of silence. I had to do it, Ivy continued, her voice tinged with regret. I had to pretend. I had to make them believe I was weak, that I couldn't do anything for myself. It was the only way I could escape her. From Linda. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Linda. Nathan's mother. The woman who had controlled everything, who had manipulated me into staying quiet, into staying in my place, into being the dutiful wife who had to take care of everything. The woman who had made Ivy's life a living nightmare, turning her into someone who couldn't even speak for herself. The woman who had told everyone that Ivy was broken, that Ivy couldn't walk, couldn't talk, couldn't live a normal life. It was all a lie. Ivy's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a woman who wasn't afraid, who wasn't hiding behind the walls that Linda had built for her. I had to do it to survive, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The less attention I got, the more freedom I had. The more I faded into the background, the more I could do what I needed to do. Ivy had been living in the shadows for so long, hiding behind the mask of disability, of silence, of helplessness, just to escape the suffocating grip of her stepmother. She had been pretending to be everything she wasn't just to stay out of Linda's reach. And all the while, Nathan had been blind to it, just as I had been. We had both believed the lie. But why? I asked, my voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ever say anything? Ivy smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. Because you wouldn't have believed me, she said simply. No one would have. Not until now. Not until you could see the truth for yourself. And that's when it hit me. The truth had been right in front of me the entire time. Ivy had always been capable. She had always been strong. But she had been playing a part, pretending to be something she wasn't, just to survive. And now, she was finally free. Free to live her life the way she wanted to. But there was more to this revelation, more that Ivy hadn't yet shared with me. She took a deep breath and looked at me with determination in her eyes. I've saved up money. I've been planning this for a long time. And I want to go to Hawaii. With you. My heart skipped a beat. What? You want to go to Hawaii? I asked, still in shock. Ivy nodded, her eyes lighting up with excitement. I've been planning a trip for us, she said, her voice full of purpose. I've got the plane tickets. The hotel is booked. It's time we went there, not as the people they thought we were, but as the women we've always been. It's time to leave all of this behind. To leave them behind. I stared at Ivy, my mind racing. Hawaii? It felt like a dream. But as I looked into her eyes, I knew this was more than just a vacation. This was our escape. This was our chance to break free from the chains that had bound us for so long. Nathan and his mother had never seen us for who we truly were, but now, it was our turn to take control. Ivy's plan was more than just a trip to a tropical island. It was a chance to reclaim our lives, to reclaim our voices, and to finally step into the light. For years, I had been trapped in a marriage that had slowly destroyed me, and Ivy had been trapped in a life of silence and manipulation. But now, we were going to take back what was rightfully ours. And that's when I realized that this trip, this unexpected twist, was the beginning of something far greater than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just about escaping the lies. It was about stepping into the truth, stepping into freedom, and finally taking control of our own destinies. We were going to Hawaii, but it wasn't just for a vacation. It was for our rebirth. I never thought this moment would come. Standing in the golden glow of a Hawaiian sunset, the air thick with the salty scent of the ocean, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. We had come to Hawaii for freedom, for a fresh start, but as I walked side by side with Ivy toward the luxury resort's poolside restaurant, it felt like we were walking into the lion's den. Our secret was out, and what happened next would shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my life, and the people I once called family. It had started as a quiet escape. Ivy and I had arrived in Hawaii without telling Nathan or his family. We were here to reclaim our lives, to breathe in the freedom they had stolen from us. But the real reason we came wasn't just to relax on the beach, it was to expose the truth. The truth that had been hidden from me for so long. The truth that had been buried beneath years of lies and manipulation. We had spent the day exploring the island, feeling the weight of our past lives slowly lift as we basked in the beauty of the Hawaiian shores. But as the evening drew closer, I could feel the tension building. We had a plan, an unexpected plan, one Ivy had set in motion long before we even arrived. The restaurant we were walking toward wasn't just a place to have dinner. It was the place where everything would come to a head. It was where I would confront Nathan, where I would finally take control of my life and my future. Ivy had been brilliant. She had planned everything meticulously, making sure we were at the same resort as Nathan and his family, but staying in a different building. She had even booked the same restaurant for dinner, at the exact same time they had scheduled their reservation. It was a move so precise, so calculated, that I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at Ivy's quiet strength. She had been playing a game for years, pretending to be weak, pretending to be helpless. But now, she was the one in control. As we approached the restaurant, my heart started to race. The elegant lighting cast a warm glow over the tables, and the sound of clinking glasses and soft chatter filled the air. But my mind was elsewhere, on Nathan, on Linda, on the secrets that were about to be exposed. We stood at the edge of the restaurant, hidden behind a row of tall palm trees, watching them from afar. I could see Nathan sitting at the table, laughing and joking with someone I didn't recognize. A woman, much younger than me, sitting far too close to him. Her hand rested casually on his shoulder, and he seemed to lean into her, completely at ease. Ivy looked at me, her face calm, but her eyes burning with purpose. "Ready?" she asked softly, her hand giving mine a reassuring squeeze. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I had been ready for this moment for a long time. It was time to stop hiding, time to stop being the one who always took the backseat. I had been quiet for far too long, letting Nathan and his family treat me like a second-class citizen. Letting Linda's harsh words and constant criticism define me. But no more. It was my time now. Ivy and I stepped out from behind the palm trees, walking with a sense of purpose, heads held high. The moment Nathan saw us, his face changed. The confident, carefree man I had once known seemed to freeze, his eyes widening in shock. The woman beside him, his mistress, I realized with a sinking feeling in my stomach, pulled her hand away from his shoulder, her face going pale. It was like watching a scene from a movie, but this was real. This was my life. And in this moment, I was finally taking control. We walked toward the table, our footsteps echoing on the wooden deck, the quiet tension between us palpable. Nathan shot to his feet, his face twisted in confusion and panic. "What are you doing here?" he stammered, his voice shaking. But I wasn't about to let him control the narrative anymore. With a calmness I didn't know I had, I looked him straight in the eyes. "What am I doing here?" I repeated, my voice steady. "I think the better question is, what are you doing here, Nathan?" The restaurant fell silent. People around us started to take notice, their eyes darting to our table, sensing the tension building. I could feel the weight of the moment, the truth just about to spill over. But I wasn't done yet. Ivy stepped forward, her movements deliberate, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "You're walking, Nathan," she said, her voice cold. "But I'm sure you didn't expect to see me walking, did you?" The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Ivy's sudden declaration made everything else in the room disappear. Nathan's face turned ashen as he took a step back, looking at Ivy with confusion and disbelief. "Wait, what?" "Ivy, what are you?" he began, but Ivy cut him off, her eyes flashing with a fierce intensity. "I've been walking for years," she said, her voice ringing with truth. "And I've been talking for just as long. It was all a lie. A lie you and your mother told everyone so that you could keep me under your control." I watched as the pieces of Nathan's carefully constructed life began to crumble in front of him. His facade of control, his ability to manipulate me, his entire world of lies, everything was falling apart. And it was beautiful. But Ivy wasn't done yet. She stepped closer to the table, and with a sudden, purposeful motion, she pulled a small phone from her bag. "You might want to hear something," she said, her voice low but firm. "This is something I think you need to hear." Ivy hit play on the voice recorder, and Nathan's words echoed through the speakers. "If you're divorcing her, at least reclaim the assets," he had said. "My lawyer says if we play it right, I won't have to give her a dime. I could even come out ahead." The room went completely still. Every eye was on us, every ear straining to hear what had just been said. Nathan's face turned red with rage and humiliation as his betrayal was exposed for everyone to hear. The woman beside him looked mortified, her eyes darting around as if searching for a way out. But I wasn't finished either. I wasn't done exposing the lies. I turned to Linda, who was sitting frozen at the table, her hand still gripping her wine glass. "And you, Linda," I said, my voice now cold, "you've been behind this all along. You've controlled Ivy, you've controlled Nathan, and you've tried to control me. But not anymore." Linda's eyes were wide, her lips trembling. But there was no more power in her gaze. The woman who had once made me feel small, who had belittled me at every turn, was now the one who seemed broken, powerless. Nathan, now completely unraveling, lunged toward me, his face contorted in anger. "You're ruining my life," he yelled, his voice cracking. But there was no sympathy in my heart. No more pity. No more doubt. I stepped back, raising my hand to stop him. "No, Nathan. You ruined your own life," I said, my words sharp and clear. "I'm just showing everyone the truth." The crowd around us was whispering now, some people even pulling out their phones to record what was happening. I had never felt more powerful. I wasn't the woman Nathan had abandoned. I wasn't the woman who had allowed herself to be pushed aside. I was the woman who was standing up, who was taking control of her own narrative. Security arrived moments later, their polite yet firm voices asking Nathan to leave. He protested, but when he saw the eyes of the diners on him, when he felt the weight of his own shame, he fell silent. The security team escorted him out, his shoulders slumped, his once pristine image completely shattered. As Nathan and his mistress were escorted away, Ivy and I stood there, side by side. The tension that had built between us, the tension that had been hanging in the air for so long, was finally released. I turned to Ivy, my heart swelling with pride. "We did it," I said, my voice filled with emotion. She smiled at me, her eyes shining with a quiet victory. "We sure did," Ivy replied. And in that moment, I knew this was just the beginning. This was the moment I took control. This was the moment I reclaimed my life. The days that followed the confrontation in Hawaii were a blur of emotions, each moment more intense than the last. The adrenaline from that night, the shock of exposing the truth, hadn't fully worn off. Everywhere I went, I felt a quiet, exhilarating strength surging inside me, like I was waking up from a long, suffocating sleep. The weight of my old life, the one where I had been subjugated by silence, manipulation, and lies, was finally lifting. And as it lifted, I began to see myself again. I saw the woman I had always been, buried under the expectations of a family that never truly accepted me, a marriage that had never been as strong as I thought. I never expected to find myself here. I never thought I would be standing on the other side of betrayal, watching the man I once loved crumble under the weight of his own lies. But here I was, empowered by the truth, ready to reclaim the life that had been stolen from me. For so long, I had put Nathan's needs before my own, believing that if I just kept going, just kept trying to make things work, everything would eventually fall into place. But that was a lie. The truth was, I had been the one holding everything together while Nathan slowly slipped away. And now that I knew the truth about his affair, about the way his family had used and manipulated me for years, I could see that it was time for me to step into the life I deserved. I returned home after the trip to Hawaii with a new sense of purpose, a fire that burned brighter with each passing day. The first few days were full of quiet reflection as I processed everything that had happened. The anger, the hurt, the humiliation, I allowed myself to feel it all, knowing that only through feeling those emotions could I release them. But something changed inside me, something I hadn't expected. Instead of crumbling under the weight of all that had happened, I stood taller. I realized that I had spent too long pretending to be someone I wasn't, pretending to be okay with a life that was constantly draining me. I had spent too long believing in a marriage that had never been equal. Nathan had always been distant, and I had convinced myself it was just a phase. But deep down, I knew that the distance had always been there. What I had once dismissed as just how he had been, in reality, a sign of the deep cracks in our relationship. I had ignored it for far too long, making excuses for him, telling myself that if I just loved him enough, if I just did enough, everything would be fine. But love is never enough when one person is constantly giving while the other is taking. I had poured my heart, my soul, and my time into a man who had never truly seen me, never truly appreciated the sacrifices I had made. And now that I had the truth in my hands, I could finally let go of the fantasy. As I sat alone in my apartment, staring out at the city skyline, I knew what I had to do. The decision wasn't easy. It wasn't something I had come to lightly, but it was clear. I was done. Done with the lies. Done with the manipulation. Done with a marriage that had never been what I thought it was. I reached for my phone and opened up the document I had saved, the evidence, the voice recordings, the messages that Ivy had helped me gather. Proof of Nathan's affair. Proof of the betrayal that had torn our marriage apart. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't imagining the distance between us. It was all there, black and white, and I was done ignoring it. I took a deep breath and made the call. The lawyer's office on the other end of the line was kind but firm. I explained the situation, and the woman on the other end assured me that I had a strong case. I wasn't just filing for divorce, I was filing with the solid proof of infidelity that would ensure Nathan didn't get away with what he had done. There would be no quiet separation, no sweeping things under the rug. I was done letting him, and his family, dictate my life. I was done being the victim in my own story. This was my moment. The next few days were a whirlwind. My lawyer set up the paperwork, and I signed it with a sense of finality that I had never felt before. As I put pen to paper, I could almost hear the last few years of my life crumbling away. But instead of fear, I felt a wave of liberation wash over me. I was reclaiming my power. I was no longer the woman who sat in the background, waiting for things to change. I was the woman who was making the change. And I wasn't afraid anymore. It was as if I could feel the weight of the toxic family dynamics I had been trapped in for so long start to dissipate. The constant pressure to please Linda, to be the perfect wife, to do everything right so Nathan wouldn't be embarrassed, those chains no longer held me. I realized that I had spent so many years of my life living for other people, for their approval, for their acceptance. But now, I was living for myself. And that was the most freeing thing I had ever experienced. When I finally spoke to Nathan, I did it with a calm I didn't know I had. He had come back home after his disastrous trip to Hawaii, probably expecting things to go back to normal. But nothing was ever going to be normal again. He looked at me, his face full of guilt and confusion, as if he couldn't understand what had happened. But I wasn't interested in his excuses anymore. I wasn't interested in his explanations. I wasn't even interested in hearing him beg. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady. "And you don't get to make this decision for me anymore." His eyes widened in shock, and he opened his mouth, but no words came out. For a moment, we stood there, the silence between us suffocating. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. "I have all the proof I need, Nathan. And this time, it's over." His face turned pale as the reality of what was happening hit him. He tried to apologize, tried to make excuses, but I wasn't listening anymore. He had betrayed me, and no amount of begging was going to change that. "I'm done," I said again, this time with finality. "You're not the man I thought you were, and I'm not the woman I used to be. I've moved on." With those words, I finally let go. I let go of the guilt. I let go of the pain. And as I walked away, I could feel the weight of the last 10 years lift off my shoulders. The divorce proceedings went quickly after that. Nathan fought it at first, trying to keep the details of his affair out of the public eye, but the truth was undeniable. He was forced to pay spousal support, and I received a fair share of our assets. The court documents were signed, the final decree handed down, and I was free. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I felt like I could finally be myself. I wasn't defined by Nathan anymore, or by Linda, or by the toxic expectations that had surrounded me for so long. I was defined by me, by my strength, my resilience, and my ability to walk away from a life that no longer served me. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I returned to work, this time on my own terms. I pursued the things that had once made me happy, things I had abandoned in the chaos of my marriage. I began to take care of myself, emotionally and physically. For the first time, I allowed myself to be selfish in the best possible way. I allowed myself to be happy. And as I looked back on the years I had spent in that marriage, I realized something profound. It wasn't the end of a relationship, it was the beginning of my life. The life I was meant to live. The life I had always deserved. And I had finally found the courage to claim it. The months that followed the divorce were a whirlwind of emotions, but they were also the beginning of something beautiful, something I had been too afraid to dream about for so long. I had spent years living in a marriage that was never truly mine, believing that love could fix everything, that if I just tried hard enough, I could make it work. But what I learned, in the most painful and liberating way, was that love should never come at the cost of my own self-respect, my own worth. When Nathan walked out of my life for good, I felt like I was stepping out of the shadows. The weight that had been pressing down on me for so long was finally gone. It wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the end of a chapter in my life that had been filled with lies, manipulation, and self-doubt. And as that chapter closed, a new one began. One where I was free to be who I was meant to be, free to live the life I had been putting on hold for so long. For the first time in years, I woke up each morning with a sense of excitement. I didn't have to fake my happiness anymore. I didn't have to pretend that everything was okay when it wasn't. I could finally breathe without the suffocating weight of guilt, fear, and sadness. I had spent so long living for someone else, trying to make Nathan happy, trying to meet Linda's impossible standards, trying to keep the peace in a family that never truly accepted me. But now, it was my turn. My turn to live for me. My turn to reclaim my voice. The first thing I did was take a long, hard look at my life. I remembered who I was before all of this, before the marriage, before the lies, before the self-doubt. I remembered the woman who had dreams, who had passions, who had goals. The woman who had loved herself enough to believe that she was worthy of more. It was like rediscovering a part of myself that I had buried deep inside, a part of me that had been silenced for too long. I started small. I signed up for yoga classes, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. I started painting again, just like I used to when I was younger, letting the colors flow freely, using art as a way to express the emotions that words couldn't capture. I reconnected with old friends, the ones I had lost touch with when Nathan and I had become so isolated. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to rebuild my life. But the biggest change wasn't just in my daily routine, it was in my mindset. For the first time, I realized that I didn't need anyone's approval to feel good about myself. I didn't need Nathan's validation, or Linda's acceptance, or anyone's opinion about who I was or what I could do. I was enough. I had always been enough. I had just forgotten it for a while. In the months following the divorce, I also saw a profound change in Ivy. She had always been my quiet ally, the one who had been there for me even when I didn't realize it. But now, Ivy was blossoming into the woman she had always been, the woman I had never truly seen until recently. She was no longer hiding behind the mask of disability. She was no longer pretending to be someone she wasn't. When we first went to Hawaii, I had no idea just how much Ivy had been planning behind the scenes. She had been saving money for years, setting aside every penny she could, secretly building a life outside of the shadows of Nathan's family. Ivy had always been smart, too smart for anyone to realize just how capable she was. And now that the truth was out, she was ready to take charge of her own future. Ivy had always wanted to be a graphic designer. It was her dream, but it had always seemed out of reach. Growing up, Linda had made her feel like she was too weak to have any real aspirations. But now, with the shackles of her past finally removed, Ivy was starting to pursue that dream. She enrolled in an online design course and began building a portfolio. She was determined to prove to herself, and to the world, that she was more than what they had told her she was. I couldn't be prouder of her. Watching Ivy step into her own power, watching her embrace her dreams with a newfound confidence, was a beautiful thing. We became a team, two women who had been broken in different ways, but who had come out the other side stronger, more determined, and more alive than ever before. Our friendship deepened in ways I hadn't expected. We began to support each other in ways that went beyond just the surface. Ivy had been my rock during the hardest moments of my life, and now, I was hers. I was there to celebrate her small victories, her first design project, her first client. And she was there for me, cheering me on as I took risks, as I ventured into new career opportunities, and as I faced the world with the strength and confidence I had once thought I lacked. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. We were both building the lives we had always dreamed of, the lives we had always deserved but had been too afraid to reach for. And every day, as we grew stronger, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and gratitude. Not just for how far we had come, but for how far we were going to go. As the months passed, I found myself doing things I had never imagined. I traveled to new places, places I had always wanted to visit but had been too scared to go to alone. I started a new career, one that made me feel fulfilled and excited every morning when I woke up. I worked on my personal growth, attending therapy and doing the deep, difficult work of healing from the emotional scars of my past. But most importantly, I was learning to love myself again. Not the version of myself that had been defined by my marriage or by the expectations of others. But the real me. The one who had always been there, waiting to be seen. And then, there was the moment that cemented everything for me, the moment when I realized that the past was finally behind me. It wasn't one single event. It wasn't one conversation. It was the culmination of everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for. It was the moment when I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who was whole, who was complete, who was no longer defined by anyone else's actions or opinions. I had become the woman I had always wanted to be, the woman who was strong, independent, and unapologetically herself. The woman who had taken control of her life, who had stepped out of the shadows and into the light. And I had Ivy by my side, the woman who had been my greatest ally, my greatest inspiration. Together, we had laid the past to rest. Together, we were moving forward with our heads held high, our hearts full of hope, and our futures wide open. This was the life we had always deserved. And we were finally living it.
That's it for today's story on Life Reflections. I'd love to hear your take. Drop a comment below with your thoughts or a story of your own. If you enjoyed this, give a like and subscribe to keep the reflections coming. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.